All right, hello everyone. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Welcome to my channel. On this channel, we do educational material. Today is, I think, the 128th video on the reciprocal system of theory. And the reciprocal system of theory is not just a theory, but a system of theory, meaning that it is, um, a theory that if you understand the theory, you can apply it to anything. So it's a theory of everything, but it's also something that if you understand it yourself, you can plug it into fields that it hasn't even been applied to before, and into places where no other theory can penetrate. But you have to understand the system first. You have to understand how it works. The basic idea is the theory was derived by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century. And the basic idea in Larson's universe is that we live in a universe of motion. The universe is made out of motion. It's not made out of matter. It's not made out of energy. It is made out of motion. And matter and energy are merely two different kinds of motion, as are all the other scientific phenomena we know out there: electric current, uh, and energy, and matter, and acceleration, and force, and pressure. They're all mass. I said mass. They're all just forms of motion. And motion is the relationship between time and space. In that relationship, time and space have a reciprocal relationship to one another. Basically, if you invert one, you get the other, just like 2/3 and 3/2 are reciprocals of each other. And what quality, just like all reciprocals, what quality adheres to one adheres to the other. We know that space has 3 or more dimensions, coordinate space, and therefore time also does have 3 or more dimensions. Larson calls that coordinate time. And we know that time is always progressing, moving, flowing, getting later and later. Larson calls that clock time. Therefore, there is also clock space. Clock space means that everything is always getting farther and farther apart. And this was demonstrated by the Hubble telescope when it observed the recession of the distant galaxies. Okay, now when we start with that, we start with motion as the background or even the origin of the universe. Motion, zero, there is no 0 point. There's no 0 point of motion. Uh, the point of the background or the origin is already a motion, already, and it is what Larson calls unit motion. Unit motion is 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, and that turns out to be the speed of light. The speed of light is 1 unit of space and 1 unit of time. And his unit motion is basically what he calls the progression of the natural reference system. This is what he calls a scalar motion. It's a motion that doesn't have a direction, but it has a magnitude. You can envision a scalar motion by taking a balloon and taking a magic marker and putting a bunch of dots on the balloon. You blow up the balloon, all the dots are moving away from each other, but in no particular direction or all particular directions. And that is a one-dimensional scalar motion. Outward. The only direction that it has is either out or in. And if you suck the balloon in, then you have an inward scalar motion. And this is the countervailing force to the progression of the natural reference system. He refers to it as gravitation. Other people might refer to it as something else, something, a leveling force or something like that. But anyway, so that's where Larson is. What we're doing for the last 10 or so videos is going over an interview that he did with Jan Sommer back in 1984. Larson started his quest way back in about 1930. Took him about 25 years to get a book out because he was doing background research, what he calls the inductive phase of his research. Once he got the inductive phase, once he got his postulates, his two fundamental postulates, then he started writing books. And he wrote about, I'm not sure, 12 to 15 books. And then many, many articles up until his death in 1990. This interview he did occurred in 1984, so he had written most of his books by this time, but he still was working on his book on astronomy called The Universe of Motion, and he had not yet put out his final book that came out after he died called Beyond Space and Time, which is on metaphysics. He has other books that are on chemistry and physics. He's got a couple of books on economics. Most of the books are on the hard sciences, except for that last one, Beyond Space and Time, which is on, philosophy and religion and psychology. Okay, now we're going to start here. Larson was just kind of saying how the scientists, the way they kind of evaluate a theory is based on what kind of predictions does it make about how things will be. And Larson was saying that his theory does make a lot of predictions that have come true, in particular the existence of quasars and pulsars that he predicted before quasars were even discovered back in the early 1960s. And he predicted, he didn't have the name quasar, but he predicted an object that would have certain qualities to it in detail. And then that object was discovered a few years later. But he also is mentioning that many of the other things in his work, those are predictions as well, but they just haven't been recognized as such. They've been recognized as, where did Larson get that? He's pulling that out of nowhere. But if you look at his work carefully and you read enough of his books, you recognize that these are consistent things and they're actually predictions about the way the universe works. But the scientists haven't understood his theory well enough to be able to make that assessment. And that's one of my criticisms of Larson, is that he went after the scientific community to try to get converts. He should have dealt with eighth graders who haven't taken any science classes yet. They would have, by now they would be adults, and they would have taken over the whole scientific establishment if you would have started with 100 eighth graders or something like that. But the mainstream legacy scientists are the last people in the room that are going to get this. Okay, now we'll start. After he got done, the scientists of 100 years from now may look at it in a totally different light. Question, but one has to deal with the way the scientific establishment works today. If we can stress that aspect of the theory, it'll be a lot easier to get the thing accepted. Larson, I want to mention two things. One of the predictions that we made is that there is a second half of the universe. That's about as big a prediction as you can make. Now, I didn't mention that, but if the speed of light is the background speed of the universe, that means that half of the universe is actually moving faster than the speed of light, along with the half that we recognize moving slower than the speed of light. Einstein said that the speed of light was the maximum speed of the universe. Larson says that the speed of light is the midpoint of the universe. So this half that's moving faster than the speed of light. Larson calls it the cosmic sector, or sector 2. And so that's what he's saying. I predicted that there is a second half of the universe. That's about as big a prediction as you can make. The other point I wanted to mention is that, in my opinion, the acid test of a theory, aside from the fact that it has to agree with all the observations, is that it has to agree with the new findings, new observations, new measurements. That's where very large numbers of theories fall down. And that's one thing on which I think we can show a very good record, because we are agreeing with all these new things coming along. I mentioned this morning about the globular clusters in astronomy, the immature globular clusters. That is a significant case where something that is very definite now is agreeing with the conclusions that we published years ago. And the same thing is true with this finding about the hydrogen atmospheres in the white dwarfs. That is an essential consequence of things that I published in 1959. Now they're coming up with something that they have no explanation for, that follows directly from what I said in 1959. And we can find quite a lot if we actually look for that and want to talk about that. And I think it's quite important. It's a lot more important than the predictions, because you might hit a prediction by accident, but you can't agree with a long string of new discoveries unless you've got the right answers. Question: I think you could formulate them as predictions. You would actually have to have made a statement about what you expected to be found. Larson: on that white dwarf business, I stated specifically in 1959 that the interior of the white dwarf was the region of lowest density. Well, then that means that the density gradient is inverse. And that inverse density gradient is the explanation of what they found with the helium atmospheres. Question: right. The emphasis on predictions is also based on the idea of Karl Popper that a theory should be falsifiable, that it should be possible to test it and either qualify it or disqualify it. Larson: all those things I have brought up as predictions here, they are all falsifiable in Popper's sense. Like many other things, they are not all testable directly. Many of them have to be tested indirectly, but that's usually within the scope of what he's talking about. Question: as long as they can be tested in some way. Larson: as a matter of fact, it is obvious that all of these are testable, because I've developed them in order to use them, and I've used them, and the use is a test. This question of the interregional ratio, for instance, you can measure it. Anything you can measure is certainly a physical quantity of a real nature. That's one thing I'm going to have to emphasize with our people here, that so many of these things they don't understand. They wouldn't understand in current science either, because there would be no effort to understand them. They would just be measured and left that way. Once in a while, somebody complains about that situation. I remember an issue of Science News probably a year or two ago where the editor was complaining about this matter of physical constants, that they just had to be taken as coming from nowhere without explanation. And again, this shows how if you're a accepted legacy scientist, you can say these kind of things and you don't get any pushback. But if you're outside the system, they push back on anything that you say. You have to have every single duck in a row in order to even get any consideration from them. But if you're already in the club, you can be careless. You can do all kinds of things that you can just make stuff up, and people won't say anything. Well, oh yeah, well they must know what they're talking about. They've already got the white lab coat on, so therefore. So Larson's pointing that out, and you could say that he's having sour grapes or something like that. But this is what I've found throughout, in this business of dealing with the esoteric and obscure is that always the case. You never get a break. You never get any deference. You always get the highest and deepest scrutiny for everything. But then you sit by, which is fine, which is fine. But then you sit by and watch people uh, who are less creative, less innovative, less disciplined come up with stuff that they just kind of made up and they just throw it in there, and then you watch the scientists just line up and to follow it without any questioning. That's why you know that the whole business is a racket, is because of their sheepishness in being able to question things that are outside of or that are inside of the profession already. You can lose your career if you question something like that, and it's found out because it goes against whatever the narrative is that has been ordained from on high. So you can tell it's propaganda, is what I'm saying. Okay, question. One attempt at explaining those constants is the Mach hypothesis. Ernst Mach had this theory that the constants somehow depend on the size of the entire universe. But that's kind of a mystical idea. Larson, he has no mathematical theory there. It's just Mach's principle. It's just an idea. It has no confirmation of any kind. And of course, in our system, it has no meaning. He is trying to tell us that gravitation is due to the presence of all these aggregates of matter out in the distance, but there is no attempt to explain how that can be done. And of course, as we explain gravitation as the motion of the atoms themselves, we don't need any such thing. So it's just a useless speculation as far as we're concerned. Question, but this apparently absurd hypothesis was treated with great respect and was in part incorporated by Einstein in his relativity theories. Why are the scientists so ready to suspend their disbelief when it suits them? Question mark. Very good question. Well, they are, Larson, they are basing so much of the present day theory on the absence of disproof rather than on proof. It's a good deal like the fellow whose wife woke him up one night and says, "John, better get busy. There's a burglar downstairs." He assured her that if she heard something down there, that it certainly wasn't a burglar. They work in absolute quiet. So he had a chance to go back to sleep and thought that he had really pulled something good. But from then on, every time she didn't hear anything, she woke him up. And I think it's very much the same way with the physicists now. Every time they don't find anything, why then they invent something. Larson usually has something dry like that to say about these things. He takes it in pretty good stride that he didn't get a fair shake with his theory. Question, what is the main obstacle to getting the new theory accepted by the scientists? I sent you some months ago Herbert Dingle's Science at the Crossroads, which documents his efforts at convincing his colleagues that the special theory of relativity contains a fatal flaw. Even though Dingle had been one of the earlier proponents of relativity along with Eddington and was greatly respected by his peers, that didn't get him very far after he changed his mind and began to oppose it. Larson, you see, the problem is that there are a substantial number of errors in present-day physical thought, but in each case an adjustment has been made to agree with the results that they got from the other. And that's one of the things that I wrote in the book there, that you cannot make a change in any one thing as Dingle was trying to do, because if you're out of step with if you do, you're out of step with all the others. The thing has to be a wholesale revision. The problem is how you get them to accept a wholesale revision. I did think that it might be possible with this new book on astronomy, since we are covering just about the full range of the general aspects of astronomy, disregarding the individual objects. And we have enough new material of their useful nature, like that use of the globular clusters to measure distances. That should be of use to them regardless of whether anyone believes in the theory or not. We have enough of those things that ought to be of interest to them just on general principles. Could you clarify a couple of points for me? One of the difficulties, oh, he's changing the subject, so I think we'll probably stop there, but I just wanted to say that yeah, this is why I'm pointing out that Larson, both Sommer and Larson are intent on convincing the crowd out there, the scientific community, that their theory is right. And like I was saying, if they would have maybe gone into like the homeschool community and gotten a bunch of intelligent eighth graders who haven't been indoctrinated into science yet, they would have had a much better audience. But this is exactly what Larson's talking about here, where he's saying, there has to be a wholesale revision. It's like if you start to tell a lie, you have to start telling other lies, to cover for that first lie that you told. And so anybody who's a liar has to have a great memory, because they have to be able to remember all the other lies they told, for future reference, so that what they say later agrees with the lie that they told earlier. And that's why eventually all the lies will come out. It's like sticking your fingers in a dike. Eventually, the dike's going to break because there's too much pressure on the lies that you've told, and eventually the paradigm is going to break just like that, and we will eventually get to this point. Okay, thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.